So did the federal budget deliver, and what will this spending plan mean for Canadian workers? Bea Burke is the president of the Canadian Labour Congress, and she joins me now in the studio. Ms. Burke, thanks for coming in.
Thank you for having me.
Are you satisfied with what you saw in the budget yesterday? There was a lot of nods to unions, to workers, and union-level wages.
We are very supportive of the investments in creating good quality jobs, and so we think that that's an absolute step in the right direction, especially jobs that are going to be tied to prevailing wages that have to take into account benefit and pension costs to determine what those wages will be. And hopefully those wages, of course, will sustain families and communities.
Okay, prevailing wage. I want to show you people at home what you're talking about, because this is the language in the budget. Subsidies that they're offering for clean tech investments are tied to prevailing wage. The higher the wage, the higher the subsidy. So the prevailing wage is based on union compensation, including benefits and pension contributions from the most recent widely applicable multi-employer collective bargaining agreement. So I read that as essentially, if you want to get into these sectors that get these subsidies, you've got to match or exceed what is being offered to unionized workers in a similar industry if you want the best bang for your buck in terms of a government subsidy. This is a big shift in how this has worked in Canada.
This is a significant shift, and it really means that we're looking to create middle-class, good community and family-sustaining jobs. And, you know, I would say that we need to go one step further and make sure that those are good union jobs, as President Biden indicated on Friday in his address, right?
No, right. No, go ahead. But here, my next question was on that. Like, often it's the extra benefits, the higher pay, and the pension contributions of a union job that acts as a deterrent, right, for employers to fight unionization. But if it's being put on the table as an incentive for higher subsidies, does that open the door to a greater level of unionization in your view?
Well, we obviously believe that every worker should be unionized, because not only does that provide you with a pathway to negotiate a good collective agreement that has good wages and benefits, but of course unions also provide you with respect and dignity at work, right? With all of the other components that go with having a collective agreement. And so I'm not so sure that employers are going to be less likely to fight having union representation, but certainly we think that that's a very important component.
Okay, we want to bring another person into this conversation, and it's a familiar face for people at home. It's Lana Payne. She is the president of Unifor. She joins us. So Lana, I wonder, what is your take on the worker provisions we saw in the budget yesterday in these clean tech, clean investment subsidies that focus on a prevailing wage and paying salaries that are comparable to what people make in unions?
Yeah, first of all, I think it's really important. This is a great move in the right direction. We were part of a number of organizations that were really pushing the federal government to match some of what was happening in the IRA. This was a game changer in terms of investments, and that actually also included a provision for prevailing wage rates. So it's important that the federal government has done this. It's the first time that we've seen this sort of thing in Canada. We did have a fair wage policy for federal contractors many years ago that the Harper government killed, but this is very important to be tying investments to higher wages and to good jobs, because we have to be getting good jobs out of this transition, and this is critical. I will say, David, that there is one important element of this, and that's the manufacturing of clean tech that is not covered. So the production side of things is not covered. This will be covered. Prevailing wage rates will apply to the construction side. Very important. Construction unions have been fighting for this for a long time. But in terms of manufacturing and operations, that is not there. So it'll be something that Unifor will be continuing to push for sure.
So just help me draw that distinction a little bit sharper for the audience at home, Lana. So construction workers building what would qualify, and what are the jobs that you would point to that wouldn't qualify necessarily for this prevailing wage incentive?
Yeah, exactly. So construction workers building clean tech, building new electricity projects, they will qualify here. In this case, if their employer goes for the highest tax credit. So right. You have to be, in order to qualify for the highest credit. But if it's manufacturing facilities, so battery plants, for example, those are left out of the prevailing wage rates. And we're saying that this needs to be extended to all of the tax credits. So we're going to continue to push for that, because I think it was an important step that the government made. But what I will say is that the IRA did not apply it to the manufacturing credit either. But we don't need to be limited by what the United States is doing. We should be doing better here in Canada.
Right, but I guess, Bea Burke, I'm going to try to reverse engineer the government's thinking here. If it doesn't apply in the United States, and this is a competitive response to the United States, they probably wanted to avoid making these facilities less competitive, perhaps, than the U.S. would be, right? Given the investments they're trying to make in Windsor and in places like St. Thomas. Would that be the rationale?
That would be my assumption as well.
Right, and what do you think of that? Do you think, I mean, I assume you're going to be on board with Lana and trying to get it applied to these plants, but what do you think of making that choice at this point in time?
Yeah, I mean, we understand that this is a progressive step in the right direction. We don't want this to be the end step of investments to create good quality jobs. So we're hoping that this is a first, and we're going to continue to push for more, of course. And I, of course, agree with Lana that it should be a more broad-based approach. What
do you think, Lana Payne, start with you, of just the order of magnitude of the response here by the government, right? $21 billion over the next 5 years, promising $80 billion on clean tech subsidies by 2034. Goldie Hyder from the Business Council thinks they've got it largely right here. What's your sense on the proportion? Because that U.S. number is just so big and it keeps going higher with each analysis.
Well, of course, because the way the U.S. has built in these incentives is that they carry on through time. It's not just a one-shot deal. So that's very important. I believe the government has done a significant response here. I can't believe I'm agreeing with the Business Council, but here I go. Yeah, I think they've done a decent job. Obviously, the devil's going to be in the details of all of this in terms of how quick the money can get out. But the reality is, if the government did not respond, we were going to lose out on critical investment that will be needed to transform our economy for the future. Since the IRA was announced, for example, in the United States, so since August of last year, 8 gigafactories have got the go-ahead in the States, getting funding through the IRA. So this was really important that the government was doing this. We had to stay in the game, and that had been what Unifor had been arguing for since last November.
Bea Burke, you're both longtime trade unionists. I've known Lana going back to her time with the Fisheries Union in Newfoundland and Labrador. My whole adult life, the policy in North America, adult policy has been to outsource a lot of manufacturing to low-wage economies to keep the cost of goods down. This is a fundamental shift in bringing it here and creating incentives for upward pressure on wages. It's like nothing we've ever seen. I mean, so Bea Burke, starting with you, what do you make of just this transition and how effective it might be?
Well, we've long been lobbying government to make sure that we're creating good quality jobs, right? And so I think that the pressure that the Supply and Confidence Agreement also put on this government to find pathways to create those good, clean energy jobs that are, family and community sustaining has actually dovetailed into this particular tax credit that we've seen tabled yesterday. And that's absolutely what we need to see. We need to be building up. We need to be making sure that families can sustain themselves, that they're comfortable as we move forward to meet a net zero kind of energy reality going forward into the future. And so I'm very optimistic.
Lana, it kind of shows how consequential that last U.S. election was, right? Where Donald Trump was taking things and where Joe Biden is pushing Canada to go now, for workers and in particular Unifor members who benefit. I mean, what's your take on this whole shift in industrial policy?
Well, no doubt about it. Biden is the most pro-union president that the U.S. has ever seen. There's no doubt about it. He takes great pride in it. He said this a number of times during his speech in the House of Commons on Friday. But to be clear, what's happening here is a complete shift in economic thinking that we've seen for the last 30 or 40 years. Two things have contributed to that: the pandemic and what it did to supply chains, and how very quickly businesses could not operate in North America because they were depending on goods coming from all parts of the world. And all of a sudden, it came home to roost just how important it was to have secure supply chains. For the future, the second thing I would say is the geopolitical situation that we're in right now. There's no doubt that that's playing into this too. But what Canada has done here is, for the first time in 15 years or more, there's been a discussion about how we build up the manufacturing sector in Canada instead of the opposite. How do we contract out the manufacturing sector to the rest of the world? And I think we're going to see good results as a result of this, and it was completely needed.
Okay. Bea Burke, Lana Payne, thank you so much for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you.